Welcome to Nasdaq TradeTalks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. Joining us at the MarketSite studio in Times Square, New York City, we have Lyanne Alfaro. She is multimedia producer and strategist and founder of Moneda Moves, also Nasdaq alum. She joins us for Financial Literacy Month, which of course is every April, as Moneda Moves focuses on the Latinx experience in business, the community's relationship with money, and the role in the American economy. Lyanne, it is great to see you as always. Welcome home. Welcome back to MarketSite.
Thank you so much, Jill. It's a pleasure to see you.
You got it. And you embody a very entrepreneurial mindset and spirit and have leveraged to bring that attention to the Latinx community. Tell us about your journey and the genesis behind Moneda Moves.
Of course. So Moneda Moves started out of a need. I started working in a lot of newsrooms here in New York that were national newsrooms, and I saw a lack of stories about Latino and BIPOC communities in business news. But I myself, having grown up in a city, Chicago, in a neighborhood where a lot of these small businesses, I saw the lifeline be these communities of color. I saw an absence and a need for these kind of stories, especially as we saw more of these communities reach higher levels of education, higher levels of income, and also productivity in the entrepreneurship workforce. So Moneda Moves is here to serve that, generate more stories about the Latino community in business.
And you wrote earlier in the year, the Latinx business trends for 2023. What are some of those trends that you're seeing in business growth for the cohort, and where are the gaps?
Absolutely. So one of the big things that we've seen is that Latinos are actually recovering pretty well post-pandemic. Of those that made it through the pandemic, they've demonstrated incredible resiliency. Where they're experiencing a lot of gaps is when it comes to funding. So Latinos and BIPOC folks who are entrepreneurs receive 2% of venture capital funding. In addition, they have a hard time getting access to bank loans over $50,000. And while, you know, for smaller businesses, perhaps that could work, for companies that are really looking to scale, that's going to be so important. So there is a disconnect that needs to be connected there in terms of how Latinos can get access to these bank loans so that they can further scale and grow.
It's interesting. You made a really great point on LinkedIn a few weeks ago that Latinx is not a monolith, meaning that it's a group of people are not all the same, and anyone who identifies with a group can relate to this. There really is no one-size-fits-all strategy. Why is it important for financial advisors in particular and the media to understand the socioeconomic and social disparities in the Latinx and underrepresented communities?
Yeah, Jill, it's so important, and I'll tell you why. Because Latinos are moving very quickly. When I first started reporting on Latinos in business in 2015, a lot of the media headlines that we'd see were around immigration. A lot of issues of how do we make sure we onboard this workforce? What are the gaps there? But as of 2019, which is still a couple of years ago, Pew Research Center even reported that most of the Latinos living in the United States are actually people who've lived here for some time. They're not immigrants. I have this stat here. As a matter of fact, 79% of Latinos living in the country are U.S. citizens as of 2019, and that's already 3 years ago. And when you look across the Latino cohort, you have people from so many different countries, which then tend to sometimes determine, because at some point they did immigrate here, their socioeconomic status. How much money did they move to the U.S. with, and how many generations have they been in the United States? And so therefore, when you look out at the Latino bloc, you're dealing with people that are in vastly different socioeconomic status, vastly different levels of education, and it's so important to not look at a person of Latino heritage and say, oh, you fit this stereotype, you've had these experiences.
Silicon Valley Bank reinvigorated the discourse on underrepresented founders and the lack of diversity in the venture capital space. That's nothing new. We know VC's been struggling with lack of diversity since inception. Are you seeing evidence that companies are investing in diversity and wage equality? Are they outperforming their competitors?
They certainly are, and it's interesting because when that news came out, we did see some rhetoric in some opinion columns in national news outlets that seemed to suggest that some of the downfall may have been due to the focus of SVB Bank being too heavily placed on diversity, which I think is a fallacy to assume that, especially because we have organizations like Just Capital producing something called the DEI, the Just Capital DEI Index, which showed, when compared to the Russell 1000, that companies, some of the top companies that focus on DEI actually outperformed the Russell 1000 in general. So even when we take a look at the numbers and take a look at companies that are doing DEI, it is actually an enhancer to the performance of the companies rather than a demerit or something that sets them back. And it's really important to not place DEI in its own silo, but rather as something additive of value to a business.
Overall, do you think quantifiable progress has been made in finance as it relates to employee fundraising, employing those in positions of leadership with the Latinx community? Where can more improvement be made?
Yes, so I think we do see more Latinos entering the workforce. A lot of the Latinos in our population today are younger Latinos. It's people who have yet to reach the height of their professional trajectory. So there is a lot of potential here, and we see companies obviously putting out their DEI reports. However, when we take a look at, for example, the Latina wage gap, we see that there is huge progress to make there. We still are at 55 cents to the dollar made by the white male man. And so there's a lot of progress to catch up on there, and to really take a look at the different, again, the diversity of Latinos, the different groups and where they stand, so that we can better target areas where people are struggling the most and help get them to a point where we achieve equity, where they have access to these resources and opportunities.
All right, Lyanne, appreciate the insight as always. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks, and thanks for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.